Hi everybody, it's Jen. Welcome back to my channel, Hallmark Plus More, where we watch and talk about shows, movies, mysteries, Hallmark ornaments, and anything else that floats our boat. So today I'm going to be reviewing Elsbeth Season 2, Episode 19. So before I get into the review, I just want to say thank you to everybody who likes my videos, subscribes to my channel, leaves me comments. I appreciate it so much. If you have any comments about the episode, you can leave that below. I love interacting with everybody. So, getting into this episode, right away you see kind of this rich kid, and he has all this money. He's had it his whole life. He's just completely bored, completely rich snob kid, right? So right off the bat I'm like, all right, obviously it's going to be him, because you just don't get good vibes from him from the very beginning. He just kind of wants the thrill knowing he can get away with whatever he does. So I'm like, yeah, he's going to try to get away with murder, right? So he actually has a shooting range in his house, and his friend Colin and him, are shooting, and he accidentally shoots Colin in the arm. And Colin's like, it's okay. I know you feel bad. And he doesn't feel bad. His name is Rod. He doesn't feel bad for shooting his friend. He actually gets kind of like a rush and a thrill. So he's like, all right, I got my thrill back. He makes this bucket list of crazy, insane things, and he's done all of them. So now he writes on his bucket list, kill somebody. And I'm like, okay, he's writing it in his bucket list, right? This is gonna be the murderer. And he goes out at night, and he sees this guy, kind of looks homeless. He's a lone stranger, kind of walking towards an old van. So he shoots him. It turns out to be 3 rounds, once in the van, once in his ear, and then he finally gets him, and he walks away, right? And as soon as he turns the corner, he takes out his little notebook and scratches it off, like kill somebody, right? So no remorse, just complete lunatic, right? Just spoiled brat who can get away with anything. And the thrill of taking somebody's life, right? Like, he doesn't even hesitate. He's 2 seconds after he kills him, he's scratching off his bucket list. So I'm just like, wow, okay. Strongly dislike this guy, complete psychopath. And then, of course, Kayla is a detective now. So she goes to investigate. She opens up the van, and it's really nice inside, like decked out with all this nice, expensive stuff. The ID shows that he's a prince and that he's royalty. So he's back at the club that he owns at, his family, and what's making him this billionaire. It's called the Canister Club. So he's sitting there with Colin, and, they're seeing on the news that this guy was murdered, and he was a prince worth $3.4 billion. So Rod kind of freaks out because he's realizing he didn't kill a stranger, he killed royalty. And Colin's like, yeah, they're definitely going to figure out who did this, right? You don't just kill royalty and get away with it. So then he kind of freaks out and leaves, and he shows up at the crime scene. And he has this run-in with Elsbeth, and of course he has like a hired, car and a chauffeur, and he lets him out of the car. So Elsbeth knows he's got money, right? He comes up with some story on why he's there, gives Elsbeth this card. But Officer Reynolds is there as well with Kayla, which is another woman officer, which we've seen before work with Elsbeth. So it was nice to see a familiar face on the case. And then the royalty security shows up at the police office, of course, because they're going to do their own security and oversee the investigation, right? Because this is royalty that was murdered. So Officer Reynolds is checking into Rod because Elsbeth just doesn't think that it's right. Like, it's odd that he comes to the crime scene and checks the alibi. He was like, oh, I'm buying the building across the street, which Elsbeth finds out he can't, right? Because it's public property. Or I'm sorry, not public property. So Elsbeth goes to the Canister Club, which is where Rod is. And Rod greets her. Rod and Colin is there, and Elsbeth, talks to Colin and finds out about Rod's bucket list and how he's kind of bored with his life because he can get away with everything. He's done everything he can possibly think of. So Elsbeth, tells Rod that there's new evidence, security footage, and Rod kind of, flinches there because he didn't know this, so he's worried he might get caught. But Royalty Security thinks another organization did it, Crown Free Movement, and then they end up claiming credit for killing the prince. So they're like, okay, case closed. But of course, Elsbeth thinks it's Rod, right? And meanwhile, Kayla has got a job offer from the woman Captain Kershaw for a special task force job. So Kayla's obviously excited about the new job, doesn't want to leave Elsbeth. The Captain Wagner, is like, this is an opportunity. You really need to take it. And she's just worried about leaving. You trained me, you were my mentor. I've really only been a detective for a little bit. Maybe I should soak that in more. And Captain Wagner's like, no, great opportunity. So it looks like Kayla might be leaving. She finally gets around to telling Elsbeth, and Elsbeth is a little distracted, right, with the current case, and with everything that went on with Judge Crawford. So she's still a little emotional about that. But she's happy for Kayla. She knows it's a great opportunity. And then Elsbeth decides to go back to the Canister Club and is like, look, case is closed. I still think Rod did it. If it's part of this bucket list, he probably wrote it down. So Elsbeth is going to go on her own and try to get the bucket list to prove, that Rod did it. So Rod finds out and is like, yeah, you can take the bucket list, and finds out, okay, you know what I mean? He probably took the pieces out of the notebook, which he did. Elsbeth gets the notebook because Rod finally gives it to her. And, the pages are torn out, so they can't do it that way. And then all of a sudden, they come to the Canister Club, and they find out that they arrest Elsbeth. So apparently, Rod must have thought Elsbeth was onto him, arrests her for harassment, and she goes to get off on bail because she's like, look, I'm a good citizen. But the judge is like, no, you've had run-ins with the law, and you were in cahoots with Delilah, who, killed Judge Crawford. Judge Crawford is another judge who's a friend of mine. So he's kind of got beef now because Elsbeth is linked to the reputation of Judge Crawford, and she technically has had some problems in the past. Now she's been dismissed. They were bogus, but that's enough for the judge to keep her in jail with no bail. So Elsbeth now is in jail for no bail for charges of harassment because of Rod. So it seems like, okay, he's got the last laugh, right? But then something occurs to Elsbeth, and she gets her one phone call from jail. She calls Kayla, tells her information. Kayla and Officer Reynolds go to arrest Rod. And he goes, well, he looked like a loser. And that's when Kayla was like, look, you don't get to make the decision, whether you think what somebody looks like, that's not who they really are. Like, I just, that just irritated me because I didn't like Rod from the beginning, which obviously we're not supposed to, right? He's a stuck-up, rich, billionaire kid who grew up with the silver spoon in his mouth, right? But it's nice to actually see him get caught and arrested. So he asks Kayla, like, how'd you figure it out? And Kayla's like, yeah, I got a phone call from jail, which was obviously Elsbeth. So, Kayla was kind of saying to Rod, like, yeah, it was from jail. You got Elsbeth arrested, but from jail, she figured out how you did it. And, she called me, and that's how we're arresting you. So I kind of like that she said it that way because it's letting Rod go, you arrested her and she still found a way to get you. So definitely justice being served, because he's so smug and he's such a brat, and spoiled kid. I'm glad he finally got it because I feel like if he thinks he can get away with this, he's just gonna keep doing it, and he's just going to try to murder homeless people, whoever he thinks he can get away with. So I'm definitely glad that they got him in the end. And then Kayla and the captain go to see Elsbeth in jail. Tell her, she was denied bail, so she gets to, she's still in jail, but they tell her about, that they got Rod and about the case so they can fill us in, right? They also tell her some news. They're like, look, Elsbeth, we're trying to get you out. You were denied bail. We're still working on getting you out of jail, right? So, there's hope, but you're being transferred to Midtown Detention Center. And that's the same place where the murderers you put away are being housed. So I was like, ooh. At first, when I heard that, I was like, that seems scary. But Elspeth's look on her face wasn't scared. She was just kind of intrigued, like interested, right? So I'm like, okay. Because typically when you arrest somebody that has to do with the police and you put him in general pop with the people he put away, I mean, he's a goner, right? If you put any cop behind bars and you put him with the murderers and robbers and, bad people, they're going to jump him. He's going to get shivved. That's typically what was going to happen. So when I heard this, at first I was like, oh no, I'm scared for Elsbeth, right? Because now she's getting moved and transferred and she's going to be with the people she put away. And then when I kind of saw her reaction, I started thinking back. Those were her friends, right? Remember, the people she put away, she was friendly with, right? She understood and she was always nice. She always treats people with respect. So even though she put them away for murder, I feel like maybe they were still nice. And still liked her. Because remember, she had that party when she first moved there, and she kind of invited the people, the suspects, and the people from previous cases because she had struck up a friendship with them. So that made me think maybe they're going to be nice to her, right? So maybe it doesn't sound as bad as it is. And then you see the preview for next week, and it shows the people in jail like dancing and talking to Elsbeth and Elsbeth smiling. So it makes it feel like in the preview next week that she's not going to have such a bad time in this detention center. She's going to see familiar faces. However, she's still behind bars. So we really need to see what happens. I feel like they left a couple cliffhangers with this episode. How are they going to get Elsbeth out of jail, right? Because Kayla and Captain Wagner are still trying to get her off of these charges. And from the previews, like I said, she's still in jail. She might be catching up with old friends, so to speak, but she's not released yet. And then Kayla has to let Captain Kershaw know by the end of the week if she's going to accept this, special task force, which we find out from her talk with Elsbeth and Captain Wagner, she said yes. So if Kayla's going on this special task force that Kershaw started, she's not going to have time to help bail out Elsbeth. So who is working on getting Elsbeth out of jail, right? Because if she's going to go into this training program, she's not going to have time for that. Captain Wagner, obviously, is the captain. He's not going to sit there and do detective work. So I'm very curious on where they go with the show for next week. Are we going to see Kayla in the new program? And how does Elsbeth get out of jail? So definitely exciting and interesting. I thought it was a great episode. The actor who plays Rod was great because I hated him from the very beginning, which means you play the part well, the stuck up, rich kid. So definitely an interesting episode. Excited for next week. Let me know your comments below. And until next time, I will see you then. Bye.